Good morning. I am Jill Burke from Calligraphy Chronicles, and I am here with Michael Sull, who is probably needs no introduction. Probably doesn't. Everybody seems to know Michael, right? I,
Well, I don't know. I don't know
I,
who knows me.
okay, so here's the thing. Not to be fawning or anything, but I talk to so many people, and the first thing they say is you were a huge influence on them when they were getting started in calligraphy. And that is a big honor because there's some pretty good names in there. People who just think that you rock the world of calligraphy.
I'm very proud of my students.
Yeah,
M- m- my teacher, my mentor was Paul O'Hara.
yeah.
And he was born in 1889.
Wow.
And I met him in 1990 when he was 91. No, 90 years old. No, I'm sorry. I met him in 1979 when he was 90 years old. He passed away in 1990. But he was remarkable because he was one of the great master penmen with, contemporary with, with Zaner and Lupfer and Mataraz and Courtney and all of the legends, the gods of penmanship. They were his colleagues. Zaner was his personal teacher. I think I'm the last living penman that was ever trained by one of Zaner's personal students. And Professor Zaner passed away in 1918. So
Wow.
it goes back quite a long ways. And I was just so fortunate to meet Mr. O'Hara and to learn from him and that he was willing to teach me. One of the things that was important to him wasn't just teaching me letters. It wasn't that he just wanted me to make a perfect A or a perfect B. He wanted me to know about the story behind all of that, the times that were what they were like when he was at the Zanerian College. He graduated from the Zanerian College in, I think it was 1909. And, it was a different time. There was a time when, before typewriters, when your
Right?
handwriting was everything. It said everything about you. The stress on writing your name really nice was paramount because if you could write your name really nice and very professional, people thought highly of you, and they thought highly of you as an educated person, a cultured person, but also as someone who had a lot of, you know, a good self-image, who felt good about themselves and proud that they could, meet the public or they could teach, they could do anything because their name was beautiful and it represented who they were. That's how this tradition of nameplates started so long ago. It was something that Professor, Spencer, when he started all this in the in the 1830s, really, that he wanted to have a physical connection with his students and help to encourage them and inspire them. And so he wrote their names. It was a physical, tangible piece of artwork from him that, what was something that the student could keep with him always. And
Mhm.
in doing that, Debbie, could you give me one of those nameplates from that we have over there, please? In doing that, the 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 student had something to aspire to really look forward to, and trying to achieve that with the type of lines, curves, shades, the control of it. And then as the years rolled on, it was something that the students would really take up for themselves and believe that it was, something that they could share as well to their own students. It became a tradition.
Right.
Professor Zaner did it, my teacher did it, and I do it. I've written thousands of names over the years and I never get tired of it. I always like to write people's names to show people, this is American penmanship. And
Right.
because I write their names, this is how I see you. Yes. Let's check. It's the one that you have in the pile there for the oh, okay. I'm sorry, I don't have it right now, but I was going to show you one, but it's all right. And Professor Zaner was also a remarkable teacher, and he felt that the highest level a teacher could aspire to would be what he called a true teacher. A true teacher was somebody who taught everything they knew, didn't hold anything back, who had no ego, and
Yeah,
whose only goal was to have the students uh, grow in their skills to where their skills surpass the teacher. So I teach, and I'm hoping that my students will get their work will surpass mine. And
yeah,
I'm proud to say I know of several students that I feel are there. That's the way that you promote traditions
yeah,
and continue this. Uh, so Mr. O'Hara gave me a great gift. And in a way, it was almost like a responsibility. But through it all, he told me all these stories about the penman's first convention,
yeah,
about something special called the master's pen, about, this hall where all the old penmen finally wind up, which is called the old penman's home. And, he told me specifics about some of the teachers, like Earl Lupfer. Earl Lupfer was one of the greatest penmen, and he was the last really principal of the Zanerian College. He was a tall, thin man. And when I met Mr. O'Hara and he asked me, who do I remember, from studying penmanship? And I mentioned Earl Luffer. He said, "You mean Loopy?" It was they were nicknames they gave to these people. So all of a sudden, they weren't just names that I saw in a book, or images that I saw from the old Penman's magazines. They were real people, and they had their own stories to tell, and it brought the humane side of them to me. And so I
right.
I felt pretty special to learn that.
And so he was 90 when he was that when you started to learn calligraphy? Was that his or were you
No,
already learning calligraphy when you started working with him?
I started learning calligraphy after I got out of the Navy. When I was discharged from the Navy, I got a job working for the Boy Scouts as a professional, um, you know, a professional Boy Scout doing youth service work. And I just wanted, to sort of pick up a hobby. Well, my mother had beautiful handwriting because she was born in the teens and she was a secretary. Well, back in those years, everybody learned penmanship, especially young women, to become secretaries and, nice penmanship and shorthand. A lot of people don't even know what shorthand is anymore, but she had beautiful penmanship. And so I wanted to, brush up on my penmanship to be like hers. But there weren't any books out in the regular bookstores for learning handwriting. Handwriting, this was, this was in the early 70s,
Hmm,
1970s. And handwriting was such a pedestrian activity that,
everybody knew how to do it.
yeah, everybody knew how to do it. It's like, you know how to open and close a door.
Yeah.
So it was so common that it wasn't anything special to write a book about for the general public. The only books were written on penmanship or handwriting. They didn't even call it penmanship; they call it handwriting. Were for elementary school students because that's what they learned. And most of those, and still is true today, didn't really have a lot of handwriting examples in them. Short sentences. Dick and Jane went up the hill, just small little, I went to visit my teacher, small sentences. But, you know, it wasn't really what I was looking for. But at that time, something really magical happened to me. My career has been really a series of magical adventures. And,
I love that. I love magical adventures.
well, it's at this same time in the 70s, this was in the late 70s, there was an article on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. It was written by a journalist by the name of Meg Cox, and it said, if journalists were calligraphers, handwriting would look like this. And, it was done in italic.
Right?
He went on to explain this new resurgence of calligraphy in America, that really was based on the calligraphic foundations by Edward Johnston and some of the other people from England. But it talked about a man by the name of Abraham Lincoln.
Woo!
Now, Abraham
Pretty good.
Lincoln, this it was his name, and this gentleman was a ninth generation descendant of President Lincoln,
Woo!
and his name was Abraham Lincoln. And he had one of the very first calligraphy stores in America where, there wasn't any computers. He had to do it by mail, but
Mhm.
he had his own books, which were unitalic, and he, sold supplies, pen holders and ink and so on. And it was called Calligraphy. It was
Oh,
he was from Brookville, Ohio. Well, I was looking at this and all of a sudden, I can consider myself very patriotic. I just come out of the Navy and um, Abraham Lincoln, like, wow. So I called him and we became friends and he encouraged me. I bought his materials. And one day, I was just frustrated because I was living in Virginia Beach, Virginia at the time, which is right next to Norfolk, Virginia. And, he I was hoping I could find somebody else locally that I could share my enthusiasm with and maybe learn from.
mm,
Right. This was also in 1979. That's how I met him. This article came out, I think, in 78, but all this happened in 79 when I met him, and then I met my teacher. I mean, when this article came out. And so I was talking to him about this, and he says, "Well, there's a lot of calligraphy guilds starting around America. Why don't you start one in Virginia?"
oh,
So I said, "That's a good idea." So I started one in Virginia Beach and called it the Tidewater Calligraphy Guild. And I didn't know if anybody would show up, but to my amazement, I did some, and I was doing italic at that time because I learned from Mr. Lincoln's books. And so I made up these little flyers, Calligraphy Guild, come to the first meeting, you know, if you have an interest in penmanship or in calligraphy, come to the meeting. And I put them in libraries and every place I could find.
right.
And there were about 15 or 20 people that showed up that first night.
Oh,
The guild was a big success. It lasted for about 10 years. I was only there for about a year and a half, but, some of the people that were in the members, they continued it. And, I was very proud of that. And through that experience, of course, I learned more about calligraphy. Well, one of the people that I met during that time was a gentleman named David Fairbanks, who was a master engrosser who studied from
mm,
the Zanerian manual. He was amazing. His work was just beautiful. And I met him at one of those scout jamborees. He was doing some signage, and I mentioned this, and he said, "Wow, that's really nice." And then he started telling me about his experiences. He was born in New Jersey, but he was raised as a boy. His father was a designer who designed tapestries in Italy.
oh,
So as
wow.
a young man, David Fairbanks was in Italy and he became fascinated with the illuminated manuscripts.
Mm,
Later, when they moved back to America, he wanted to get into that more. And that's when he found the Zanerian manual and started, studying that. And some of the other people like Arthur Schick, who was a tremendous engrosser who used to illustrate a magazine called Pageant and another one called Cornet magazines in the 50s.
oh,
I mean,
wow.
so this all went back to that. There was another gentleman, just a champion engrosser by the name of Alberto Sangorski, who had gorgeous works, and he studied those. And so he started teaching me. And when I would go to Mr. O'Hara's house, this was just before sorry, when I went to Mr. Fairbanks' house, this was before I met Mr. O'Hara. I would go to his house and I would study with him. And then sometimes he'd be busy doing his own commission work.
Right.
And So when that happened, I would go to the corner room of his living room where he had his lettering library. All of us have our little books,
Mm.
they're treasures, they're precious. And he did. Well, he had a lot of books on calligraphy, but he also had these magazines, these
Oh,
wonderful magazines called The Business Educator. They were from the
oh,
turn of the century and they were all about penmanship. I looked at those and I couldn't believe how beautiful simple penmanship was. And I was learning engrossing from Mr. Fairbanks, which included a lot about color. But everything in those magazines was black and white, and yet I thought they were as beautiful or more beautiful than all of this colored, design work that I was doing.
right.
All of those magazines had these beautiful illustrations, these beautiful specimens of penmanship, and they had a postage stamp size photograph of the penman who was credited as doing them. Well,
So a very, very small photograph.
yeah. So I said to Mr. Fairbanks, please, can you teach me this? He says, no, I don't do that. I do broad pen lettering and make certificates.
Right,
If you want something badly enough and you can't get it, you want it even more. So,
right,
so I studied those magazines. I went through all of them, and in doing that, I became familiar with the names of some of these very famous penmen and their pictures and their work. So I
right.
could right. Well, there was one name that kept cropping up, and it was Paul O'Hara.
Yeah,
Now I was in Virginia Beach, and my Mr. Fairbanks lived in Chesapeake, which is another city right next to Norfolk, Virginia. And Mr. O'Hara's name kept cropping up. There was a picture of him on a motorcycle. He loved motorcycles. He got married to a woman named Jessie in 1918, and for their honeymoon, he put her in the sidecar of his motorcycle and went across the country. What a
good
guy.
for him.
So there were many examples of his work, and there was one picture of his house. That was in one of the magazines from the 1930s. And it said, this is the house of veteran penman Paul O'Hara, who bought this house with the money he earned as an engrosser from learning at the Zanerian College of Penmanship. It was an
Right.
ad for the Zanerian College. I mean, it was a remarkable. So I was fascinated with this work and these people and these beautiful, images of the penmen themselves. Well, one day, and it was in 1979, I had seen those for several months, and I went to Mr. Fairbanks' house, and he was filling out diplomas for the local very large high school. And
Mhm.
filling out diplomas, it's a pretty good job, for a freelance calligrapher. So I said that. I said, "Boy, that's really nice. Have you been doing it long?" That's when the magic started. He
Ah,
said "Well, I've been doing it for a while, but there was a man who did it for years, but he's old now and doesn't do it anymore." Now, at
oh
that
my goodness.
I was 30 years old. He was, about 66 or so, maybe a little bit older. And he says, "This man was old and doesn't do it anymore, so he's still alive." And I got so excited. I said, "Who is he? Is it somebody that can teach me? Can we meet him?" He said, "Well, sure. It's just Moby, just Paul O'Hara." You know,
Oh
like
my goodness.
like, just the next door neighbor. And it was like, if you're interested in American history and you learn all of a sudden that Benjamin Franklin is alive and living down the street,
Mm.
it was amazing. So we went into took his car and we went to visit Mr. O'Hara. And we went to that house that was in that picture
Oh,
from 40 years before. It was
wow.
amazing. He was 90 years old. He said nobody had talked to him about penmanship in 50 years. He had very raspy kind of, "What do you want to learn this from?" And so I told him, and I started mentioning the names of the penmen whose work I had become familiar with. And that's when I mentioned Earl Lupfer, and he says, "You mean Loopy?" And it sort of broke the ice a little bit. And then
Yep.
he grabbed my hand. He said, "Let me see your hand." And then he started squeezing my hand and pawing the fingers. And he said, "That's good. I don't want you to lift weights. It'll make it too pudgy for penmanship." It, it was amazing, and then he was a very thin man and a little stooped and bent over, but he was still very physically fit. And he said, "I want you to give me a poke in the stomach." Now, he was 90 years old. And I
Right?
and I don't hit anybody. I mean, it's furthest thing from my mind. So I said, "Mr. O'Hara, I can't do." He says, "Damn it, son, give me a poke." I mean, he was just insistent. So I took my finger and I just poked in his stomach, and it was hard as a board. And he started telling me about the importance of being physically fit as a penman, and that you have to have good posture and you have to use your muscles correctly. It's more than just letters. It was an amazing time for me. It was magic. And so
Mm,
that was in 1979, and so I he was very gracious, and of course, Mr. Fairbanks was too, and so I would go to each of their houses. Mr. um, O'Hara lived in Norfolk, Virginia, and so I made the travel to those cities to visit these men. And then, I was always so active in the Calligraphy Guild. Well, my fellow members of the Calligraphy Guild, started seeing my work, and they started, seeing how seriously interested I was in this.
right.
One of the members was a young woman who had gone to a very well-known art institute in Massachusetts, and she was working in Norfolk, as an illustrator. And she laughed at me and she said, "This is really great." He said, "If why you like this so much, why don't you send your stuff to Hallmark Cards?"
Oh,
Now I never knew anything about Hallmark Cards, except of course you buy their cards when you go to the store, but I never knew about, that they got artists. I never thought
right?
of it, right? I didn't even know what a portfolio was. So I just in a laugh, I did about a dozen pieces of my script. And I put it in a manila folder, not even professional. I sent it to Hallmark, and I was amazed. They hired me. And
Yeah.
they hired me because my script was really American, which is very different than commercial greeting card script. Commercial greetings card script is more like script signage, it's bold. I mean, it's different than, how can I say it? It's not so much spontaneous as drawn. It's
Right.
beautiful, it's really nice. It looks a
Yep.
lot more like copperplate, um, or in America, engrosser script, but nothing like Spencerian. Well,
Mhm.
anyway, this was this was 1981. So it was, like 2 years after I met Mr. O'Hara, or maybe three. It was, because I met him in 79. This was 1981. And I left to go to Hallmark Cards. And I was very sad because by that time, Mr. O'Hara was like 92 or 93. Of course, I figured I'd never see him again. But,
Right.
I moved to the Kansas City area, which is why I still live here. And we kept in touch with Mr. Fairbanks and Mr. O'Hara. And it was amazing. They wrote back to me, we kept our communications going. In 1986, I had worked at Hallmark for 5 years, and I learned a great deal about being a commercial lettering artist and how to
Mhm.
do that commercial type of script as well as other hands. And, I became, better at doing the commercial work. But of course, I still proceeded with trying to better my skill in Spencerian. And so, in 1986, Hallmark, which is a big, corporation, they had a big budget cut and they cut out 250 jobs. And
Oh,
mine was one of them because at that time in the greeting card world, the trend was brush lettering with torn paper and pastel colors for greeting cards. Some people,
yeah, I remember those greeting cards.
yeah, that was the big thing. And so old looking American penmanship wasn't really useful anymore. And so they let me go. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I could have, I thought I probably could have gotten an interest from maybe American Greetings in Cleveland to go work for another greeting card company. But something told me to stay in Kansas City. And I became a freelance calligrapher. And I did for, gosh, 35 years. I did a great deal of wedding lettering, but I also did a lot of corporate work. So I branched out and still focused on my Spencerian and ornamental penmanship and still, kept in touch with my teachers. And finally in 19, yeah, that was 86. Actually, just before that, when it was about 1984, I started because I was so cut in touch with Mr. O'Hara. I got in touch with his ideas about teaching the history of American penmanship.
Right.
And because I was very active in the calligraphy guild and the calligraphy world, I was pretty familiar with the calligraphy books that were published at that time. None of them were an American script. It
Yep.
was all basically English script and English calligraphy, as well as older styles like, Neuland and, you
Yep.
know, Unschul and so on. It it was there was this big hole of no penmanship from America. So with my team, I talked to Mr. Fairbanks and Mr. O'Hare about this, and with their encouragement, I just decided I was going to do whatever I could to make calligraphers learn and appreciate this beautiful script that I had the good fortune to stumble into.
Right.
I just decided I was going to write a book. And I never wrote a book, but I decided I'd write one and I would make it the biggest, most comprehensive book on American penmanship that had ever been done and put it before, the calligraphy world and show them
Yep.
what it was. So, I mean, there's more to the story, but I did. I started, going to, Geneva, Ohio, where Spencer lived, where he's buried. And, finally in 1987, a couple of years, well, actually in 84, 85, and 86, I approached the directors of the International Calligraphy Conventions to ask them if I could teach American penmanship. And they said, no, that's just cowboy lettering. There's
Oh,
complete freedom to it. There's no discipline. You just write whatever you want. Well, of
that
course,
sounds a little bit like the current debate about modern calligraphy, but
yeah,
some things never change, right?
it was incorrect. It wasn't that they were, angry. It's
Yep.
just that they didn't know. And there
Yep.
were several books by then that had come out that one book, came out about, um, script. It was more copperplate script, but in the preface to it, it said that Spencer was from England.
Oh,
He was born in New York State.
yep.
It, there were other things that came out, that said that Spencerian was just an afterthought. It was an American form of copperplate, which it's not. It's based entirely on a different premise than copperplate or English roundhand, because it's spontaneous. It was meant to be handwriting. And that's why
Mm,
your Spencerian doesn't have to look like mine.
right.
It's individual because this is America. When Spencer designed it, he did it so that everybody could learn and have their own sort of unique way of doing it, whether it was fancy or plain or big or small, heavily shaded or not shaded. But as long as the forms were the same and they were based all on nature, on
Yeah.
curvature, movement, contrast, and variability. So, and it worked. And all of a sudden, in the, around 1840, 1850, people like a miner, coal miner in Pennsylvania who didn't have a big education, all of a sudden could feel comfortable with learning handwriting because it didn't have to look like the master's handwriting.
Right.
You know, so it took over in this country. It was remarkable. And, I well, I was very fortunate. So I was learning all this and, but it was 1986. I'd been declined to teach it for 3 years. And so I just decided in 86, because I was let go from Hallmark, all of a sudden I didn't have a, 9 to 5 job. I
Yeah.
just decided that they wouldn't let me teach it. I'll teach it.
Yeah.
And so I had been going to Geneva, Ohio to do research for my book. And I just decided I'm going to teach or Spencerian script here, where Spencer lived, where he took inspiration from Lake Erie and the waters, where he's
Mhm.
buried. And so I did. I started it and I called it the Spencerian Saga. And the first year I had 13 people come, and one of them was from Canada.
Ah!
So, yeah,
All the best people in the world are from Canada.
it, it was an amazing experience. I taught it, was the director of it for 26 years.
Wow.
We had people come from all over the world and many of the, of course, United States.
Yeah.
And then finally in 2012, at that time I was writing my book on cursive writing, and I, gave the directorship of the Spencerian Saga over to one of my students that I trained, and and I certified her as a master with IAMPATH, was Harvest Crittenden, and she kept it
Oh,
going, and I think it's still going. So, it
it
was
is, and
important.
her work is beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very proud of her. She
Yeah.
was one of my best students, and, she does beautiful work. And
Yeah.
besides that, she's an excellent teacher. And see, that was very important to me.
Right.
She's more organized than me, I'll say that for sure. But that's how that all happened. Well, during all this time, I kept trying to improve my skills, and they got, a little bit better. But this idea of the stories that my teacher told me kept echoing in my mind, because as I did the Spencerian saga, I was there in Geneva, Ohio, which was like Penmanville. It's like
Yeah.
that's where penmanship, Spencerian started. And I saw many examples of, of his work and the other penmen as well. And so the stories came back to me that Mr. O'Hara would tell me. And so I started thinking, I really would like to tell these to my students. One
Mm.
of the things that I had done mostly, since I was, gosh, in college, I loved the idea of stories, and I liked poetry.
Yep.
And I really like rhyming poetry more than anything, because to me that there was a certain magic about making words rhyme but also make sense in a story. It gave it something extra special.
Yep.
I wrote many poems when I was in college. I went to the College of Forestry at Syracuse University. Well, of course, that's nature, and and this was way before I became a penman. But I wrote a lot of poems about nature. And then in the Navy, my job was navigation. I steered the ship, and I went up, all over. I mean, above the Arctic Circle and the Mediterranean. So I had
Wow.
these experiences, that were very special to me, excuse me, about the sea. And I wrote a lot of poems about that. Well, now I was a penman. So I took these stories and I turned them into narrative type of poems that would talk about, something very special called the master's pen, which
Right?
in only only the masters would use this pen at the end of the penman's convention, and it was made of amber, and the point was made of gold, and that
Ooh.
only the masters would use it. It was very special, and so I wrote this. It was a legend, but I turned it into something that was a narrative, poem, and I would really enjoy reciting that when we have at the Flourish Festival.
Well, we're gonna recite that at the Flourish I think is that the one you're gonna read for us now as well?
No, no,
You're gonna read us a different one.
no, yes. Now, I don't know if can you see this?
Yeah, we sure can.
That's an illustration of the Penman's first convention.
Wow.
That was a remarkable time. And, I started writing these poems about the convention, about Spencer and such. And a friend of mine really liked it. And so she illustrated some of these. Well, one of the poems that just came to me on my drive back from Ohio to Kansas City was something that I thought of I called it the old penman's home. It's a
Mm,
place where, all these famous penmen, Spencer and Zaner and Blosser and all of them, would go after they passed away to still be able to write. It was this special
right?
place, and that really filled me with these ideas, these visions of stories. Um, it was something very special to me. And, I wrote this poem about it. And that's the poem I'd like to read, if you
I'd
don't
like to
mind.
read it.
Now, I'm just gonna take a sip here of my drink. And by the way, before when I was talking about these nameplates, this is one I did recently. This is the kind, can you see these?
Yep, that's
This is
beautiful. Oh, Anandita.
yeah, this
Oh,
is the
I
kind
love Anandita so much.
that's the kind of work that the masters would do. Whoops, I'm trying to
Yep,
focus for you. That's a nameplate.
yep.
I've done so many of these, and I never get tired of it. And I'm going to be very proud to write one for you, Joe.
Oh, I'm so excited. I have
Yeah.
some that other people have done above my desk, and it makes me happy on days that I'm working a little longer than I might like to look up and see what
Well, good.
how blessed
I
I
hope
am.
you'll enjoy mine. So anyway, this is what this poem is about. And this illustrator friend of mine, she drew this as the old penman's home. Can you see it?
Oh, yep, yep,
There it is.
lovely.
So for all those who will be hearing this, I want you to think back in time, not when there were computers or even, ditto machines, mimeograph machines, before typewriters. I want you to go back at least 120, 130 years. I want you to see yourself, imagine yourself at this table with all of these famous penmen around you, all doing their work and the energy that was there and the smiles and the beautiful work that was being done. And this
Mhm.
might bring that back a little bit more. So I'd like to share this with you. I call it the old penman's home. There's a place where penmen wander to when their pens are idle and still, where pen points never touch paper and the inkwells lie unfilled. It's a home for cherished memories of a special, most personal art that comes from within the artist, from within the penman's heart. And it's there where the legends linger as they have for many a year of ladies and men who handled a pen through a Bristol board career.
Mm.
And there's stories. Lord, there are stories from writing's golden age, tales retold by penmen of old as if read from a dusty page. So, I have heard you want to listen and walk in the past for a spell. Well, just settle down and gather around. I believe I've something to tell. You see, I heard it again just yesterday as I crossed the main street in town. I looked here and there and about everywhere, but there wasn't a soul to be found. And it happens like this wherever I go in the city or hushed country hills. And it just seems meant to be, as it calls to me. And my heart and my mind hear it still. And it says, go to the crossroads a mile ahead till a tumbled old barn is in sight. And where the road swerves, just follow the curve. take the first turn to the right, and, well, 100 yards or maybe more, you'll find a wandering stream. And there by an elm is a magical realm, the place of a penman's dreams. Yes, and once more I read that, and then came that feeling of a guide to the past in my mind, of a guide who can steer to a place far and near that I once left far behind. You see, all of us are immortal. All of us are mortal. Just pinch yourself and you'll see. Can your fingers clasp? Can you reach or grasp? Does it hurt when you skin your knee? Yes, all of us living are mortal. The deceased, our lives moved on, but there are some names through friendship and fame that, well, that never seem to be gone. Many are known through history books. They lived in the past for a while, and some will be dead in the years ahead, but, well, today we can still see 'em smile. And maybe, maybe perhaps in the future, those people will be the names that'll be remembered like glowing embers as legacies that remain. And as I pondered about these things, one evening, sometime last year, I just thought of who I could tell it all to. It's a story I wish you to hear. Now, it seems this isn't the first time, we've gathered in some sort of way. Well, you've listened to me so patiently and hear what I've got to say. And yes, I've told you a number of stories, some with the essence of truth, of legends and friends from way back when, of penmen in prime and in youth. And I've brought out the names of the masters and some of the things that they did, of heroes from then, and outlaws and men like Fine Rider Frank and the Kid. And, well, it may seem they've all just vanished from those simpler times of the past to become folklore of the years before and, well, just remain memories that last. But now, my friends, it's time to tell the last story, where the saga comes to an end. So, well, frankly, after I'm gone and someone else comes along, they might tell the stories again. You see, I've recalled those days of glory and the skill their actions all took, and left in the sand that writing by hand that are only seen now in scrapbooks. And but you might ask, but what became of the penmen, and where did their paths finally go? Well, I, I I've got to admit, I just fibbed quite a bit when I said I didn't know. For yes, I've spoken of the golden age like a yarn told by a warm fire, but for all I've said, there's a special homestead where all penmen go to retire. Yes, sir, it's a place in a town without any name, a place where time stands still, a spot on the earth without death or birth, where the world goes by at will. And it's a place I've seldom mentioned before as I've rambled in story and poem, just a simple place of history and grace. And it's called the Old Penman's Home.
Mm.
My name is Michael. Yes, sir, Michael Sull. Yeah, and once I wrote a fair hand, and I'm proud to say that back in my day, the pen was at my command. Yes, sir, I really was a penman. But I'm 88 this year, and, well, my days in place when I'd write with such grace are, Lord, they're back in the past somewhere. You see, I heard of a spot called the Old Penman's Home where my teacher was guiding my hand, and he'd say to me, "Someday you'll see," but I didn't quite understand. He spoke of a town where the masters lived and were still slinging ink all the while, and his eyes would just glaze when he thought of the days, and then he'd lean back and smile and said, "Yes, sir, Michael, they've got a place for me, I hope. They promised in one of my dreams. Zaner said so some time ago. And I've no call to doubt him, seems. And I think I'll be there not long from now, and I can't hardly wait for the time. And Michael, if you practice right, then someday I might introduce you to some friends of mine. Yes, sir, and they'll probably give you a special pen, one made of amber and gold, and they'll say to you, "Let's see what you do with hairlines and shades that are bold." And then my teacher's old eyes, they watered a bit, and he said with a crack in his voice, "And you'll write for them with a skill without end. You simply won't have a choice, I'm telling you now. It'll happen." I could tell when I looked in your face. I knew from the start that inside your heart was a penman's soul and grace. Art, you'll write at that table with Courtney. Madara's off to your right. You'll sit in that chair and they'll all be there. It'll be an amazing sight. And Michael, there'll be a brief moment now and then when you'll feel soft as could be, a hand on your shoulder. Well, then just locking over because Michael, that'll be me.
Mm.
So go now and practice. See me next week. We'll work on the capital stem, and you need to gain skill in doing cross drills, and then we'll practice the hairlines again. Well, so it went on for weeks and months, and I had a career as a scribe. I wrote and I taught, and I constantly sought that connection my teacher described. And then one day I was writing along diplomas, in black letter style, and I just thought I'd take a half-hour break and stretch my legs for a while. So, I went outside by the garden path, just taking in that fresh air. And I just begun walking when someone was talking, but I couldn't figure from where. And it wasn't like loud conversation, as if someone was calling ahead. It felt like it came from inside my brain, like the voice was within me instead. And it was almost a whisper, you know, telling me what I should do. Like when you're in bed and there's thoughts in your head that just never really come true, but yet I could swear that I felt it, for it came to my mind, not my ear. And it beckoned me on, till I came upon a place where the path disappeared. And it said, "Go to the crossroads a mile ahead till a tumbled old barn is in sight. And where the road swerves, just follow the curve. Take the first turn to the right, and 100 yards or maybe more, you'll find a wandering stream. And there, by an elm, is a magical realm, the place of a penman's dreams." So I walked, but felt I meandered, like in a fairy tale, till lo and behold, just like I was told, I saw a weathered porch rail, and behind it the porch with rocking chairs of an old house fashioned of stone, and behind it the porch with rocking chairs. Huh. And then I saw that I wasn't alone. There by the front with a waving hand was a gentleman smiling at me, and he let out a grin and beckoned me in. And I wondered who he could be. As I moved ahead, I studied the house. It was massive, impressive and old, like a building that lasts from out of the past, about which stories are told. Above the front door was an arching sign with scrolls and leaf filigree, and carved on the sides were angels and scribes that seemed to be looking at me. And the letters there, they stood out bold in relief, all raised and curved like a dome, but as I read it, I gasped, for it said 4 words: "The old penman's home." And meanwhile, the old gent came towards me. I could see his watch chain and vest, and as he moved closer, I saw it was Bloser, and he said, "Come in and join all the rest." And there, there were all the old penmen, and not just the masters of lore, but women and men who picked up my pens from their own glory days of before. Rick Muffler was talking of shaded script with LaRoche and Charlton Howe, and off down the hall by the Hall of Fame wall, I heard, "That's the best ink there is now." Yep, there was movement back in a corner, two men whose voices were raised. "Those shades," said one, "can only be done as I did 'em back in the old days." But the bigger man laughed and jumped up and down and shook his hands in the air. "This ink is the best. Just give it a test. There's nothing that really can compare." And it was then I had to laugh at myself at this scene of respectful disabuse because, well, John de Colibus argued with Madaras, telling him which ink to use. Oh, and there on another side of the room, good Lord, but what did I see? There was Bucci, Costello, and some other fellow. Gosh, it was E.H. McGee, and involved in the conversation were others whose work I had known, men of renown like E.L. Brown, Martin, Cook, and Malone. Filling was talking with Marlett and Rice. Kelchner described his technique, and Daniel Ames was calling some names. I watched as he stood up to speak, and he said, "Dennis, Baird, Fields, and Grove, you know what I likes to do? I take Davies gray and I mix it this way, with just a touch of rich Prussian blue. I find that it makes a nice background to contrast the border design. It just lightly, not mold, so it sets up the gold. Lord, it makes all the gilding just shine." And then they went on, those engrossers. Yep. Living a scene from the past, colleagues and friends who spoke without end like a story that lasts and lasts. And of course, there were more I recognized from my personal past with a pen, and a tear came to me with the memories that were flooding back once again. McCaffrey and Herford like brothers in arms, Aki de Groot and more. And my gosh, there was Ledecker. I worked with her on that mural back in '04. Crittenden, Held, Keswick, and Welch, Ray Calvas and Deercoats Brown. Yeah, Joe Vitolo and others I know from, you know, that family reunion I found. Brian from England, Stanley Sysak, good Lord, Jim from my Virginia days. Saunders was there, and Blackwell and Pat Blair. I, I just didn't know what to say. And then I saw Mr. Bullock, Fairbanks, and O'Hara. My teachers, those wonderful men, and well, they just opened their hearts to give me a start on a journey without any end. And I wondered if they knew I was here and how much I valued their praise. And if they looked down, were they pleased that they'd found I kept up the old sacred ways? Well, I wondered, and I felt some contentment, for I just guessed it must be true that they wouldn't be here, if they didn't care, and somehow I think they knew. But then I walked down to the flourishing room where Schofield was leading the show while Courtney and Clark were doing their part to make the Bristol board glow. I saw Blanchard and Wesco and Tamblin, Collins, Lehman, Canaan, left for Zaner and Berensmeyer. The list just went on, and their work was simply amazing, like tapestries of design, as if they'd been sewn with a life of their own, with detail never so fine. There were birds I knew to be just pen and ink, but yet as I looked at their form, they seemed to have flown from places unknown, where the lands were exotic and warm. They flew in great flocks upon every page, while the swans were majestic and still, and bounding stags pranced and frolicked and danced this way and that way at will. My gosh, it was such a sight I was speechless, but then I I saw several men point at me. Well, Blosser appeared, and as he drew near, I wondered, What could it be? Well, he carried a box made of rosewood, and then he lifted the top open wide, and he said, "For all you've done, the time has now come." And I watched as he reached down inside, and he withdrew a staff of pure amber with a point mote of gold, and then, "You've taught as you've learned, and well, now it's your turn to use the master's pen." And so I sat at their table and I penned with a skill I had dreamed. My birds just flew and my letters did too. I never wrote better. And then with a reverence, they took my arm, leading me down the hall, and there was my name in the Hall of Fame carved on the master's wall. And everyone present was smiling, and a voice seemed to say once again, "I told you so a long time ago. I remember as if it was then." And I looked deep into my teacher's eyes, and I felt him tug at my sleeve, and well, from that very day, I just knew right away that somehow I just couldn't leave. So there, my friends, you'll find me. Yeah, but it's time now. I must say goodbye. Hey, but if there comes a day when your path finds a way to a place where the road just divides, then go to the crossroads a mile ahead till a tumble road barn is in sight. And where the road swerves, just follow the curve and take that first turn to the right. 100 yards, or maybe more, you'll find a wandering stream, and there by an elm is a magical realm, the place of a penman's dreams. And you just might hear some laughter, and perhaps vintage tales of lore, as you'll be in the past with memories that last from long ago days from before. Then just go up those steps by the weathered porch rail, and you'll see that it's more than a poem. And I hope that you might grin when I welcome you in to visit the old Penman's home.
Mm. Oh, I'm a little verklempt. That was beautiful, Michael.
Well, thank you. It brings back a lot of memories for me of stories my teacher used to tell me. And I was just very fortunate and very lucky, and I really love to teach. I love to share what I learned, and all the different things that I've sort of developed myself over time. And when I see the smile in my students' eyes, it fills me with such energy that I couldn't even put it in words.
Yeah.
It's just that kind of thing. But
I have one quick question about your book. Have you tweaked it since then, or is it still the first penmanship book? Is it in print the same way?
well, it's actually in a second edition. I've added poems to it,
Ah,
and I'm in the process of adding more. So it'll eventually be a larger book. But right now, it's about 50 or 60 pages as the penmanship book.
I went into a little art gallery not far from here in Turner Valley called Blue Rock Gallery. And as I walked in, I told you the story. There was one of your books front and center as you walked in. It was the first thing I
Yeah.
saw, and I thought, what a reach you have.
Well, I've just been very fortunate. We've heard from students, all over the world. And before COVID, I traveled to 18 different countries, and
Yep,
everywhere I went, just, regardless of culture, of language, everybody was just fascinated with the beauty of American penmanship.
yep,
So I've been very fortunate. I don't really look at myself as anybody special. I'm just a storyteller bringing back these portions of the past that have been so rich, to me.
yep.
So I wanted to mention something about,
I know, I was just gonna say, before we go, let's just quickly mention the pens that you make.
well, of course, to do this penmanship, you need a pen, and most of the, people who did ornamental penmanship and Spencerian script
Yeah,
and, copperplate back in the late 19th century and from then on, used an oblique pen holder.
right.
And because, again, of my training with my teacher, it's a tool. And
Yeah,
because it's a tool, there's a certain way it should be made so it's held in the hand a certain way. And, it the twists and turns as you manipulate your fingers, the angle, position of the point as it touches the paper, that's all important.
yeah.
And so many years ago, over 30 years ago, I started making these pens. And, I've made over 8,000 of them over the years.
Holy crap.
And I make them available to sell to my students. And many people say that it's the most comfortable one and the best one they've had because
That's
my
what Callan
pens,
says for
my
the that's
pens, they're they're shorter than many other pens. They're about 7 inches long, and you know it's beautiful wood. I love wood, so I don't dye the wood. I don't paint it. So they come in all different types of wood species, but I adjust every flange so that the pen point that I put in it will be perfect for writing. And, we're going to be making these available for, they're available now on our Etsy site, and they'll be available at the
at the
Film
Flourish Festival.
Festival as
We're
well.
gonna do a pre-order, so if people want them, they can pre-order them so that you make
Sure.
sure you get one, but right? Because 'Cause I'm
Yes.
sure they're gonna sell right out.
Well, I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak, to everybody through this, medium, and I look forward you know, to doing my best to bring back the 19th century and early 20th to my students when in
Yeah,
Calgary, Alberta.
yeah, it's gonna be we're gonna have a lot of great conversations that week, a lot of good laughs, a lot of, a lot of connection. Lots of fun, but fun can be lots of different things. I think the kind of fun that this is the kind of fun that fills your soul back up a bit, makes you
Oh, it
feel
does.
like you're in the right place.
It does mine. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, you go ahead and have a rest of a wonderful Sunday. I am gonna go and work on my garden for a little bit and play around. So I love that we could start the day this way. It was a great, great
Yeah.
start to my day.
I did my gardening yesterday. That's my hobby is flower gardening.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you very much, Jill.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you too. Bye bye.